This blue box, for myself and I'm sure for many others, this was the first thing we ever learned how to cook. Okay, so the reason I learned to cook this is because I got tired of my mom overcooking it. Sorry, Mom. Nothing says childhood like making it, but I got a secret for you. The way they tell you to make it is not the best way. Stay tuned and I'll show you how you can flip this into a better mac and cheese, and I'll also give you guys 3 tips on how to supercharge your box mac and cheese. So if this is your first time cooking, or you've been cooking your whole life, grab yourself a drink, crank up the music, and let's get cooking. So to start us off, of course, we need a nice big pot full of water. Here's tip number 1. Any pasta can be instantly transformed with the wonderful addition of salt. Ask any Italian, they'll tell you they don't boil any pasta without salt. How much salt do you need? Well, they say until it tastes like seawater. Personally, I don't open my mouth when I go swimming in the sea, so I have no idea what seawater tastes like, but it's pretty salty. We'll go with that. By the way, you guys are gonna learn fast that I'm not about accuracy when it comes to cooking. If you want accuracy, check out my mother. She's amazing at baking, and baking you have to be so accurate, which is probably why I love cooking, because you can just keep playing with it till it's how you like it. So with that underway, let me tell you my second tip. Now this is your standard macaroni. It's thin, it's got a little hole in it. A lot of people like to use this because that's intended to trap the cheese. The problem with this is that I find that macaroni, above practically any other kind of pasta, with the exception of angel hair, is a one to really overcook. And I think that's because the water gets lodged in that tiny little hole, leaving the middle to be mushy and the ends to be just done. So when it comes to macaroni and cheese, I'm actually a big fan of using the cute little shapes. These things lets the water go through, but still has enough tiny little holes that it can hold on to that sauce. So everyone has their preference when it comes to pasta. There's no right way of doing it. Whatever you like to use is best.
Once the water's at a rolling boil, go ahead and pour in your noodles. Just remember to take the packet out of the box before you pour, unlike I just did. It's fine. That'll dry.
So while that's going, let's talk about what the salt's actually doing to the pasta. So because pasta is basically a dried noodle, the only way to get flavor into the noodle is to get it into the water. Now, some people do this with herbs and spices in the water. I haven't found it to kind of carry that flavor forward, but salt will always do that. And don't worry about the pasta tasting too salty. The salt really is just there just to waken up your taste buds a little bit. So for those of you guys who have concerns about too much salt, don't worry. Salt in the water is fine. Just make sure not to add more to it until you taste it.
Once the pasta is just cooked through, go ahead and drain it and put the pan back on the stove, but leave the heat off. There's going to be enough heat left in this pan to be able to melt the butter. A great tip from Spooky Pills, which I actually love doing as well, is adding just a little bit more butter. Don't worry if your pot has a little bit of a ring around it. That's purely from the pasta. Stir the butter until it has completely melted. And now, time for my favorite tip, adding in a couple of shakes of curry powder and a shake or two of cayenne. This step is completely optional, but I find that it boosts the flavor just a little bit. Thankfully, because there's enough heat still left in this pot, we don't actually run the risk of burning a spice that's this finely ground. Quick word of warning, cayenne is super hot, so add at your own risk. Stir this into the butter and let it heat up until you can just start to smell it.
So what the curry is actually doing is helping to kind of amp up that cheese flavor that we're not quite getting because this is a dried product. Let's be honest. Now the box wants us to pour the noodles back into the pot before we add the butter or the milk. The problem with this is that either one, the macaroni is just gonna get smushed in the process. Or two, and I know you guys have seen it as I have, where the little powdered sauce just kind of gets crammed into the holes. It doesn't integrate well, and it makes you feel like you're eating pixie sticks with noodles. But if we reverse all that, we get a much better dish.
First, I pour the milk into our spiced butter. I usually add about 1/2 to 3/4 of what's actually called for on the box.
Now, I don't always follow exactly the amount of milk that they tell me to on here because I find it kind of comes out like cheese soup. Have you guys experienced that? I add just a little bit of milk periodically as I go along until the sauce gets to a consistency that I like, which is nice, rich, and thick. Actually a little bit thicker than what you would want because remember, those noodles still have a lot of salted water in it. That's gonna help to not only season the sauce, but also thin the mix out a little bit. And at the end, what we should shoot for is every noodle nice and coated and no sauce on the bottom of the pan. Finally, from Misa, a great tip that would help even make aluminum siding more delicious is adding bacon. And I was going to do that, but I've got some great recipes coming up for you that we're gonna use that bacon to a little bit better purpose because it is technically the superhero of the kitchen and there are some villains it needs to fight. And there you have it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If there's any recipes that you guys would like to see on the show, please be sure to let us know down below. Any tips and tricks that you guys like to use for your box mac and cheese, please feel free to share those as well. Coming up next, we take some of the green villains that you guys know as vegetables and turn them into a dish you love. If you'd like to get that in your playlist, just hit the subscribe button below. Doesn't cost anything. I don't know why we still call it subscribe. Just basically add to playlist. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next video.